All right. With that, I'll call the Oregon Public Records Advisory Council to order. Let's check to see what members of the council are in attendance and determine whether we have a quorum, please. Todd, would you mind just quickly doing a quick, I don't know if we need a roll call vote or just a call as to who is present on the council, but it would be helpful if we can determine whether or not we have a quorum. You're on mute.
Sorry, would you like me to just go down our list?
Why not?
Okay. Todd Albert, present. Molly Woon. She mentioned she'll probably be about a half hour late, so we don't have her now. Michael Crone.
Present, but on mute.
Thank you. Adam Crawford.
Present.
Welcome back, Adam. Emily Harris.
We see you, Emily.
Present, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Steve Suo.
Present.
Les Seitz.
No.
Scott Winkles.
Present.
Rob Bovett. Mark Landauer.
Present.
Tony Hernandez.
Present.
Rep Power. Okay, we are at quorum, Mark, with 9 members present.
Thank you, Todd. First item on our agenda is to approve the present agenda, and I'd be more than happy to take any suggestions from the council members to add any additional agenda items. So let's move to approve the existing agenda, I suppose is the proper format, I would gather. So I'd certainly entertain a motion.
So moved.
I believe that was Tony moved, and a second, please.
Second.
That was Les.
Oh, I'm sorry. And Tony, I believe you are serving in our reporting, so thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
It was a motion made by Les, second by Todd. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing no opposition, are there any motions for additional items to be added to the agenda by members of the council? Hearing none, we will go to item number 3 on our agenda today, and it is my sincere hope that we will end early today and not use the entire 2 hours. That is the chair's hope, but clearly I don't control everybody here. So first, has everybody had the opportunity to review the minutes? I believe we have 2 sets of minutes. Todd, is that correct?
Yes, the minutes from our second meeting were received this morning, so I don't know if everyone's had an opportunity to review them or not.
I'd certainly enter. Go ahead, Tony.
I just wanted to apologize for getting them in at the very last minute, and that will not be the case moving forward.
No worries. I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes from the previous 2 meetings. However, I'm also more than happy to split those, and if we need to take those up from our last meeting at our next meeting, I'm happy to entertain that, but I'm more than happy to entertain a motion for the adoption of both sets of minutes.
So move.
Thank you, Les. Is there a second, please?
Seconded.
Second.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Steve. All in favor, please approve by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, the meeting minutes have been approved, and at this time, I would like to open the meeting to public comment. We will attempt to limit our time for public comments to 5 minutes total and 2 minutes per individual. Scott, I see that your hand is raised. Please go ahead.
Sorry, I guess it's a point of, I don't know, order, but I'm seeing this person trying to get in. Are we having a hard time getting the public, allowing public members into the meeting?
Ms. Sheck has been the only one that I haven't been able to admit for some reason. I keep pressing admit and it keeps saying it failed. I just texted her and asked her if she could use the call-in number. So hopefully that'll work for her.
Oh,
And
okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure we didn't have a problem with public access.
No, so far, unfortunately, she seems to be the only one.
Thank you. At this time, as I began, we do allow for public comment at our regularly scheduled meetings. We traditionally make 5 minutes available for the public, although we are very flexible on that. And each individual is allowed up to 2 minutes at the discretion of the chair. Is there anybody in the public that would like to address the council at this time?
I'm looking for raised hands, Mark. We do not have any at this time. If there's anyone who would like to speak but can't raise their hand, please speak up now.
Okay, seeing no public comments, we will close the public comment period at this time. And now we will begin item number 5, finalizing the membership in the previously approved subcommittees. Those subcommittees, I believe, included bylaws, fees, and then, Todd, please forgive me, what's the third one?
It's legislative, non-legislative, and bylaws. I made a handy dandy Word document. I could share my screen and show you. It includes who's in what and who hasn't yet volunteered for our subcommittee. And Steve communicated with me a little while ago a pretty good suggestion about sharing the ideas between the subcommittees. That's probably worth discussion, although I think it might serve best to send that document to whomever we select as chairs for either committee. But perhaps, Mark, you may want to discuss that. So if you give me a moment, I will endeavor to share my screen.
Well, and I'd certainly love to hear Steve's thoughts on his little chart that he produced with all those fancy colors.
Data visualization.
So there we go. Scott, you still have your hand. There we go. Thank you, sir. All right. Now I think everybody can see the document that we have before us, the non-legislative subcommittee. And just as a reminder, if you're not on the call, your number ending in 04, if you could please mute yourself, we would appreciate it. Thank you. On the legislative side, we've got, and I believe that when we were talking about legislative, perhaps more clarity on that needs to be provided. And I'm certainly open to being corrected at any time. But this one, I think we're sort of more centered on the issue of fees, if my memory serves me correctly. And then, of course, the bylaws that will govern the operation of the Public Records Advisory Council as well. We have, and then not yet assigned to subcommittee. We have a few folks there as well. I want to make a quick note. We have learned that 2 existing members, at least Todd, will not be seeking a reappointment at the end of this year. Both Les and Scott, as I understand it, are not pursuing a second term on the council. And I want to make a note of that simply because it's very likely that these committee assignments, or I should say subcommittee assignments, will go beyond the terms of their position on the on the council. And I guess one question that we need to address, and Todd, I suppose I'd look to you, are Les and Scott's terms, if they do expire prior to the conclusion of these subcommittees, what are we going to do in that event? I look to your sage legal counsel and to the rest of the members of the council on any direction on this, because this was something that sort of popped into my head a couple days ago. And before I go any further, I want to recognize Representative Power, who has just joined us. Thank you for joining us today, Representative.
Sorry, my internet went out at 2 o'clock, but we got it back.
Well, we're glad you could join us. Todd, just any reactions to that? I have no idea how we go about that. I know that Scott had sort of volunteered on chairing the bylaw committee, but since then we've learned that he will not be seeking a second term on the council. I don't know if Scott, can you finish it by December 31st?
Yeah, I think for purposes of establishing the bylaws, if you need a bylaws committee, so if an issue comes up you need to revisit, then I would think you would want to reappoint. But I think, yeah,
good.
I don't think I don't know where I haven't talked to the rest of the committee yet, but I wasn't planning on sending a treatise. I think the models I've been looking at are fairly clear and concise.
Well, and I suspect that there will be plenty of interest in other members who have not been assigned to perhaps fill out some of these subcommittees as well. Todd, any suggestions? Where do we want to go? At this point, I assume we want to fill out these subcommittees and give them their marching orders. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, Mark, I think we should let the committees get to work. And as some of our members depart, we could certainly either just slot in the new members, sort of like, welcome, new person. This is the committee you're on. We hope you're willing to do it. Or, after the new year, after the committees will make their initial reports in December, and if the PRAC wants to sort of take up the heavy lift of reconstituting subcommittees after we get new members, we could go that route. But I mean, I've certainly been on committees where you show up and they're like, hey, glad you're here. This is your subcommittee, get to work. And then, later you have a chance to revisit other type work. I'm sure Rep Power knows what I'm talking about in terms of committee assignments and stuff when you're the new person. So I think we're probably okay to just slot people in as they come and then down the road sort of take a new look at it.
Great. So the purpose of item number 5 today is to finalize membership of these previously approved subcommittees. I think it would also be wise for us to appoint a chair, maybe a vice chair for each of these subcommittees. And I'm hopeful that there will be volunteers rather than us railroading certain individuals into these spots like I was into this. So we'll start perhaps with our non-legislative subcommittee. I think we have the volunteers for the non-legislative subcommittee include Todd, Steve, Les, Molly, and Tony. And we would certainly welcome any other members to join that. Todd, perhaps it might be wise to just do a quick summary of the quote-unquote non-legislative subcommittees' potential scope of work, so that the other members who were perhaps not able to join us at our last meeting can at least have an initial understanding, although I would have hoped that they read the meeting minutes as well. So for the general public's purpose and perhaps a reminder of the committee members, why don't you just give us a brief summary, and sorry for putting you on the spot, what the non-legislative subcommittee will be responsible for.
Sure, I'm going to pull up the list we came up with from our website, so just bear with me for a moment. I think you should all be seeing the list now. This is our non-legislative objectives, and overall we came up with a 10-year strategic plan, how to provide guidance, feedback on public bodies, public records policies, state local agency survey regarding public records practices, a transparency impact statement, just looking how far we have to go, transparency by design, best practices and whether agencies are pursuing them, PRAC advocate information on Oregon Transparency website, transparency by design, proactive disclosure, regular contact interfacing with Transparency Commission and the Sunshine Committee, advocate employee public education, bylaws, top 5 exemptions leading to disputes, public education and accessibility, allocating adequate resources to public bodies for processing public records requests, model public records policies for local agencies, education advice on how to avoid getting into disputes over exemptions, standard typical pitfalls, report from the advocate on the nature of requests and themes, district attorney orders on public records requests, public records practices survey, fact-finding commission regarding COVID-19, or rather, I suppose, agencies' response to public records requests during the pandemic, fact-finding commission on fees, bylaws, and data dashboards. And since I'm talking, I will also volunteer to chair this subcommittee.
Thank you, Todd. For those of you who perhaps were not with us last time, I would very much hope that you'll be willing to serve on at least one of these subcommittees. And the other thing that I just want to mention was that Rep. Power was not on the meeting last time when we compiled this list. And I want to ensure that she has the opportunity to provide some input if she has other issues that she would like added to the current list. So I see your hand up, Rep. Power, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mark. Those all sound pretty comprehensive to me. My question to the group was, I wanted to attend this meeting before emailing Todd back and letting him know what to add me to. As a legislator, should I be on the legislative committee by default, or can I do something different?
My response to that is you're a legislator and you can do whatever you want. So I personally would appreciate being on the legislative committee, that you would join that committee, representative, because I think you have, you have more experience and insight into this than all of us perhaps combined. So I personally would welcome your participation on the legislative committee, and what you choose to do, I think everybody would likely go along with it. So that's my response.
I would just agree that if you prefer to be on a different committee, we'd probably want to talk to you about what was was bubbling up in the legislative committee anyway. So I suspect, we'd want the guidance from both of our representative members, the senator and you, on anything that comes out of the legislative committee.
Okay, that sounds good.
And as a quick follow-up, Representative, the legislative committee's first item to address is a bill that you are likely remember very fondly, that you and I had a couple discussions about, and that will be fees. That will be the very first item that this legislative subcommittee will be taking up. So I suspect that you might want to be on that subcommittee, just say. I do see Steve's hand up as well.
Thanks, Mark. Just a couple thoughts. I think it probably makes sense to have Todd read the same list for the legislative committee. It did include some things other than fees, although it seems like those are probably going to fall farther down. My observation, because I spent some time with both of these lists before the meeting, and that was the thing that I sent you, Mark, is there's a good deal of overlap, like among these each row of ideas, and then across the two committees. So I think I was going to suggest in terms of item B on the agenda where we're defining work assignments, maybe we can leave that kind of loose so that the chairs can sort of sort that out. And I can share this thing that I prepared if it's helpful, or maybe it's just with the chairs. I tried to sort of group things together into like piles of things that might make it a little easier to sort out. But anyway, that would be my suggestion. And last thing on that is I would be happy to vice chair the non-legislative subcommittee. Oh, one more last thing. I did notice that the membership of that subcommittee is a little bit lacking in public body representation, and maybe it would be helpful if there are people without assignments yet. That could be a place to look to.
Thank you, Steve. I believe we have another hand raised. Todd, Adam, I believe.
Yes, hi everyone. I think I'd love to be a part of the non-legislative group. I think I'll get enough of the legislative stuff in my day job, so happy to be a part.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate your willingness to step up. I do see that we have, okay, that hand disappeared. Oh, yes, Tony, please.
That was me. I was wondering if we, for all three committees, if we can just take a stab at like a one-sentence description. So I appreciate that we read like all the items, but I got the non-legislative committee discusses ideas, projects, research, and other matters not tied to the Oregon legislature and making laws. Does that sound okay? Okay, thanks.
I like it. Thank you, Tony. All right, so for the non-legislative committee, do we have any other volunteers who are on the council who would like to do that work? We have a new member, Adam Crawford. Again, thank you, Adam, for volunteering. One of the things, and back to Steve's suggestion, I think one of the things that we might want to consider, and I'm certainly not wed to this, but allow for the subcommittees to meet and to decide who their chair and vice chair are, although we know who the vice chair of the non-legislative subcommittee will be, with Steve's volunteering for that position. Or on the other hand, we could certainly figure that out now. I'm not wedded to either approach, Todd, but it does seem to me that it might be beneficial for us to assign leadership so that somebody in those subcommittees is responsible at the outset for getting a meeting convened of those subcommittees. That's just my thinking, and I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts. Todd, please go right ahead.
Sorry, as the organizer, I can't actually raise my hand on this thing electronically. Yeah, Mark, I just wanted to say I agree with you because someone's going to have to organize the meetings to happen before our December meeting. So it's probably better to charge someone now to do that or to pick leadership, in my opinion. And since people are actually willing to step up, myself included, it might be easier to get that done now. Actually,
Todd, if I remember correctly, you volunteered to be the chair and Steve volunteered to be the vice chair. Do we need a formal motion for that, or do we just go ahead and nod our heads and move forward?
I think a head nod is acceptable.
And Tony blessed it, so we're good there. Thank you, Tony. All right, so we have a chair and vice chair for the non-legislative committee. I'll suggest that you guys can figure out if and when you will be meeting. And if there are any other volunteers on the council that would like to participate, unless you speak up now. All right, let's move over to the legislative committee. Todd, I don't have that document up in front of me. I know I had volunteered to participate on that, but as chair of the council, I do not intend to pursue a chair or vice chair of any of these committees because I have enough responsibility keeping you all on the ranch. So we've got Todd for the legislative committee, Emily, Steve, Senator Thatcher, Sharon, myself, Rep. Power, are there any other individuals that would like to participate in this particular subcommittee?
And Mark, if I might, maybe I shouldn't have been so presumptuous putting Rep Power on there. It sounds like she was talked into it, but I don't want to put her there if she doesn't want to actually be on that subcommittee.
No, not at all. Thank you for adding me in there. That was my understanding of the previous discussion.
Great.
Terrific. Well, in that case, if we don't have any further, I spoke personally with Rob Bovet about this particular subcommittee, and he had agreed, at least to me, that he would serve on this subcommittee. So if we could place Rob on the legislative committee, I would appreciate that, even in his absence. And Tyler, I'm sure you'll remind Todd of that, or excuse me, Rob of that. And then I suppose we should probably set up a leadership of this particular subcommittee, both a chair and a vice chair. Are any members of the subcommittee, I should say, willing to serve as the chair of the legislative subcommittee? Well, thanks for everybody running up and volunteering. Very much appreciated. If it reverts to me, it reverts to me. I'll do it, but I prefer not to. Anybody?
Mark, I'm on the volunteer as vice chair since I'll be in a support capacity anyway, but I don't want to chair two subcommittees.
Okay, if Todd's the sub chair, I would volunteer as the chair, but I think I interrupted somebody who maybe wanted to do it.
No, I was going to offer, if it helped, either our office or Senator Thatcher, if her office is here, in terms of helping to schedule and facilitate, because I know that's a lot of work in and of itself.
That's great. Thank you, Representative. All right. Well, it sounds as though we have a vice chair. Emily, did we get a chair? Anybody?
Sure, I'll volunteer for chair with since I know there's strong support in Todd as vice chair.
Terrific. Thank you. And then for our bylaw subcommittee, and as a reminder to the council, this group will work on bylaws by which the Public Records Advisory Council will operate from. And I know that we have Scott, Molly, Tony, and Senator Thatcher. Are there any other potential candidates who would like to serve on the bylaw committee? I expect that this will be a pretty short-term subcommittee. And so hopefully the work of this particular subcommittee can be wrapped up by the end of the year, which is an enticement for those of you who might consider serving on it. Are there any other volunteers who would like to serve on the bylaw subcommittee?
Hi, Mark. This is Michael Crone. I am not going to volunteer for this committee, but I'm afraid that I was having connection problems while you guys were talking about the legislative committee, and that's the committee that I would prefer to serve on if it's not too untimely for me to make that request.
No, Michael, you're more than welcome to join. I know you have a lot of experience in this area, so your participation would be welcome. Thank you. Still looking for a vice chair and chair volunteer for the bylaw committee. If not,
well,
go ahead.
Scott, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mark. Scott, I really liked the idea that you mentioned last week or at the last meeting about bylaws that were especially inclusive. And so I don't know, I think forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think you mentioned you'd be willing to chair. I'd be happy to back you up and vice chair it if you want, and we can knock it out before your term is done with the rest of the committee members.
Yeah, I think that would be it'd be great to have you on board. I have I kind of wish Rob was here. I have a question about the nature of these committees. Are the committees advisory to, actually, I'm sorry, I'm phrasing this poorly. So the committees are public bodies in and of themselves, correct? So we would comply with the meeting rules?
This is Michael Crone. I definitely think that is right, Scott.
So I'm looking at the roster of the legislative committee, and people make their own calls on this, but if this group comes up with a bill, and I'm looking at the people who are going to be in the CAP working the bill, you're going to have a quorum of that group meeting on this topic, and that strikes me as a challenge.
Well, let's have a discussion about that, Scott. I think that's a fair point to raise, and of course, me not being an attorney, I will probably not be interjecting any of my opinions, but I'd certainly be interested in Michael and Todd's thoughts on Scott's point.
Can you kind of say that again, Scott? I'm not sure. Is the issue that there are so many of us that a quorum of the subcommittee is also a quorum of the committee, or something else?
Well, if it's a quorum of the subcommittee and the subcommittee is a public body for purposes of the public meeting law, I don't know that the legislators would count towards the quorum because they would serve, if they're serving ex officio in the subs. But that would be an interesting clarification. But if you had the people who are going to be working these bills or be talking about these bills in the Capitol, and they might be doing so from the capacity of representing their clients, that's a potential serial. It could be, I think there's a huge potential for a serial meeting violation, but there's probably also a large potential that they would be in a quorum at the same time without a notice, talking about a matter that was on their agenda, deliberating on a matter that was before them.
Scott, do you mean when you're down in the Capitol lobbying, sort of not serving in the capacity on the PRAC per se or the subcommittee per se, but you wind up in the same room? Is that the scenario you're painting? I'm not totally sure I follow either.
So this will be a really interesting conversation in the bylaws committee too, I suspect. But a quorum of the subcommittee can't meet without a notice, a public notice. If they're going to, well, they can't meet if they're deliberating. They're talking about an issue that was before that was on the agenda, that was part of their work product. So if they're in the course of doing their job, and then say Michael talks to Mark talks to Sharon talks to Todd, and that happens often enough, you get what's called a serial meeting violation.
But with those conversations,
that you have a rolling quorum.
Are you concerned that the serial meeting violation would be triggered just because they would have conversations about other things, or because they would have conversations
if they're having
conversations
about an item, a topic that was that was part of their agenda, that was part of their work product? I'm assuming if they're sending bills, those bills would be subject to those quorum requirements. Conversations about
this is Wes. One clarifying question. My presumption would be that these subcommittees would all eventually report to the full council, and that any item advanced to the legislature would be an item promoted by the entire council, not by one of these subcommittees. So it seemed to me, Scott, that the issue would be the council and not the subcommittees, unless I'm missing something here.
Well, that's why I asked the question about the nature of the subcommittees. If they're public bodies in and of themselves, then I think you would need to have, it may be advantageous to, you're going to have to figure out a way to do that work, plus for these people to do their work in the CAP. But if the subcommittees, if the subcommittees are merely advisory to the full council, maybe that's not the issue. That's not as significant of an issue.
Well, I would think that in
We've
the
done-
capital, they would be acting in the capacity of the council and not the subcommittee, but
let's if I may, and Scott, I think you're raising a very interesting point. I'd like to hear from Michael and Todd. Let me share just my initial sort of reaction, though. This is the Public Records Advisory Council, and the purpose, one of our purposes, is to provide transparency to how government operates. With that being said, it would be the chair's desire, at least, to not keep these meetings in secret and hidden from the public. I think that the public should be able to participate in the work of the committee or the council, and or be aware of the operation of its subcommittees in the spirit of transparency. With that being said, whether or not these subcommittees actually meet the technical definition of public meetings, I cannot answer that. But it would be my hope that the council as a whole would agree that these meetings ought to be noticed to the public, and the public ought to be able to, at a minimum, listen in. Having said that, I'd love to hear Michael and Todd's sort of response to this conversation. And Les, I do note that your hand is still raised. Perhaps you can interject before we hear from the highly learned lawyers in our group here.
oh no, I defer.
Well,
Well, let me take. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Todd.
Michael. No, go ahead, Michael.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So I think absolutely that these subcommittees will need to follow the public meetings law. I would kind of like Les be very surprised if there was like subcommittee members collectively working to actually do lobbying in the building on bills that the PRAC had, supported following a recommendation from the legislative subcommittee. So I guess the way I think we would want to handle this is just with the clear expectation that if there's going to be anyone lobbying on behalf of the PRAC or its subcommittees, like the latter really just shouldn't happen actually. But so let's just say if there's anybody lobbying on behalf of the PRAC, first of all, it should be with the express approval of the full committee. And second of all, it should just be like one or maybe at most two people. So we're not ever going to have a quorum issue there. Does that seem to you, Todd, like it addresses, if I've understood the concern correctly, which I'm not 100% sure I have, but if I have, that would be how I would address it.
I'm going to take a quick prerogative here, and perhaps I'm assuming something from Scott's statement, but if you do look at the legislative committee, depending on how you count it, it could be considered a quorum of the PRAC, right? Therein is the challenge, and why I had sort of indicated that I believe that we should be noticing all of these subcommittees as if they were public meetings, despite the fact that, at least for the non-legislative subcommittee and the bylaws committee, we aren't going to reach a quorum of the PRAC, but I still think it would be a disservice to the public to not notice and make available to the public to listen into those discussions.
Yeah, I think that part is right. And I think actually that part is like legally required. Like the subcommittees are their own public bodies that are going to be meeting the requirements of the law. But even if it's not required for some reason I'm not thinking of right now, absolutely we should do it. I was more focused though on the problem of, well, while we're doing this lobbying work, are we going to run into problems and how we might avoid that?
Yeah, Mark, I would just add, I agree with everything that's been said. These committees are merely advisory to the full body, but should follow the public meetings requirements, whether or not they are actually obligated to do so, including notice. Public feedback is really important for the work we're going to be doing. To Scott's points, no matter who's in the building doing the work, we're still obligated to uphold the public meetings requirements, including avoiding serial meetings, just like we would from full committee work. So whatever happens in subcommittee would be the exact same thing, the exact same requirement. So as long as we adhere to what we've been doing in full committee for our subcommittee work and being mindful of our obligations when we're in the building and outside of these meetings, then I think we'll be okay.
I saw Steve's hand up first. Emily is on deck, and Tony, you're in the hole.
It sounds like maybe what Scott's describing is during session, the common practice of forming a work group to negotiate details of a bill, and I guess conceivably, like the seven voting members of the legislative committee who constitute a quorum of the full PRAC could be that working group, like outside the context of the PRAC. If there were no PRAC, maybe the working group is it, or maybe the subcommittee is the working group, or the PRAC is the working group, and it's all done out in the open. But that's, I guess, if the concern is a member of this committee wishes to preserve the ability to hold a working group outside the confines of a public meeting as a public body, that might be difficult. And I guess that's a kind of legitimate question. Like, once session starts and there's an agreed upon bill that is like the PRAC bill, assuming we get there, then what are members' obligations as individuals, or how will they conduct themselves as representatives of their organizations or representatives of the PRAC? I don't know the answer to that, but I think is that the scenario? Is the working group idea, the flexibility to be able to communicate with these other six individuals, Scott, is that what you're, or I guess you're not a member of this meeting.
That's half of it. The other half is, let's say, I'm just going to run through it, like maybe the analogy is contact tracing, which I guess we're now all familiar with. But let's say Rob asks Todd, hey, is there, or Todd tells Rob, there's an amendment to our bill. Where are you on the bill? That conversation, there's no quorum because that's Todd and Rob. Rob says to Mark, hey, where are you on the amendment? Who then might talk to another member of who was planning to testify. None of that is intentional, but you create eventually that chain, which could happen very easily and very quickly. That chain will eventually become a quorum, which is, it may not be an intentional violation, but it's still a quorum has discussed an item that was on an agenda that deliberates. And this is how we actually train our members as part of their elected official orientation, not to do that, and how to avoid that situation. So I think we deal with this pretty daily in public, on the public side. So it's almost second nature to for some of us at this point. But that's part of the scenario. A work group would be easy. We could just notice it.
Can I ask?
Aren't we already in this situation now in our full committee?
Yeah.
We're under the same concerns and issues.
Yes.
Potentially, but it's a larger quorum number.
Can I ask that?
I also really think that the serial meeting thing, and this came out of the Lane County decision, And the Court of Appeals focus there was really on the like intentional, or the trial courts too, was on the intentional skirting of quorum requirements, so that it's not just like I talked to Rob about the bill and then Rob has a separate conversation with Emily about the bill. It's I talk to Rob about the bill and then ask Rob to tell Emily what I'm saying about the bill, right? It's a very specific type of behavior that the courts were really concerned about, where you're effectively having a meeting where you're learning about the views of everybody, or at least a quorum, while avoiding the requirements of the public meetings law. And I just really can't quite envision the circumstance in which our members would do that, honestly.
Well, I know nobody on this commission is going to do what happened in that fact pattern, but I think the consensus from the council that I've talked to who were on that case was that the judge really couldn't nail them for what she wanted to, and this was they settled for this. I'm simply, if you don't think it's an issue, then I'm sorry to have taken us down this rabbit hole, but this is what we train our members to avoid.
Well, I think it is a good thing to avoid, but I also don't. I mean, I think that we are in that position already. We should generally not be talking to each other serially about the business of the PRAC, and we certainly aren't going to be doing it in the way of deliberately trying to deliberate without having to get together as a quorum all at one time.
You're muted,
I
Mark.
suddenly wanted a gavel. Can I have a gavel?
I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute myself once again. As a reminder, won't be the first or the last. Emily, I believe you had your hand up, but it's now lowered. Are you done? Because I believe Tony was in the hole, and I'm going to get back to Steve here.
My question was answered. Thank you.
Tony, you're up.
Yeah, it was just a really quick question slash request for a reminder. This feels like the advice that we've gotten from like the very beginning of not communicating via email with each other, and that if we needed to communicate with a whole group, they should be sent to the advocate. You know, in this case, Todd would then send it out to the entire group. It feels like people shouldn't be talking to each other, like Michael just said anyways. But I didn't know about the chain public meeting, so I really appreciate Scott, you bringing that up, because I hadn't realized that a chain discussion is an open. I should have known that. So thank you.
And I will echo that sentiment, Tony. I do think that's a valuable discussion, Scott. I do think that we may be able to get this addressed in the bylaws. Just as a reminder, don't send emails to individuals. Steve, you're up.
Yeah, I would echo all that. I mean, we could, in the scenario of the working group, like if, say, we end up with a bill from this legislative committee and it's in session, you know, we could, we definitely, members should err on, like, if there are things that they wish to deliberate with fellow members on, then that should be in the context of a subcommittee meeting. We might actually think of that as being the working group, what otherwise would be a working group for hashing out differences, like in real time. It could be a really radical experiment in transparency, like to basically say what ordinarily would happen in literally a back room of the Capitol would happen in sunlight, and it raises some practical limitations, and it could slow down the process a bit, but it would be a really interesting thing to see if we sort of defaulted to this being the place to hash those things out.
I want to try to wrap this conversation up. I think are all sensitive to the fact that these discussions could and probably are public meetings. and that we ought to operate as though these subcommittees are public meetings and that they ought to be open to the public. Is there any disagreement on that point? So it's my takeaway that these subcommittees ought to be properly noticed, and Todd will end up likely relying on you to put those public notices out, simply because you're already doing it for the larger council, and I suspect it's not too difficult to do that. Please let us know, though, if you feel otherwise, because I don't need you overwhelmed with doing subcommittee work when you have other responsibilities as well. Are there any other comments for the good of the order? I believe that we've sort of covered A and perhaps part of B, but under item number 6. Are there any other conversations we need to have at this point, Todd? I'm going to sort of look to you and the rest of the members of the council. I see Tony almost raised his hand, Emily as well. Tony, why don't you go ahead and we'll listen to Emily, and then we'll have any other follow-up from Todd at this point.
I was just going to suggest that we had talked about last meeting if the subcommittees would be required to have minutes as well. And so I've been looking up like a general, just like template that I'd be happy to share with all the committees that people can just kind of fill out. I didn't know if there was any interest in talking about how to record keep these public meetings, or if that was necessary at all. So I just
it's a great point, Tony. I think that it's a valid point, and what I'll suggest, unless there's pushback, is that the subcommittees figure that out amongst themselves. Each subcommittee has a vice chair and chair, and they'll have to figure out the rules under which they're going to be operating, with the understanding that these will, for our purposes, be considered public meetings and open to the public. But you are right. I do believe that as a result of us being public meetings, that there needs to be some kind of recordation of what occurred during that meeting as well. Emily.
I'm sorry, if I could just interject for a quick second to put a bug in everyone's ear. Just a reminder that there's more than one way to fulfill our meeting minutes requirement, and that could even include posting a video. We already do extra in this committee, or in this council, which is great, but just FYI, and we could talk about it in between meetings as well.
Thanks, Todd, for that reminder. And yeah, it is nice to have a range of ways to fulfill the law. I just want to, this is a great time to commend Tony on the really exemplary meeting minutes he's been putting together. I mean, I've been looking actually at what other public bodies do to get a sense of, where we're landing. And I think at some point we may be able to just say, hey, give some advice, like here's best practices in this, video age plus, hybrid in the future, and encourage that. And so thank you, Tony, for taking that extra step. My question about, the reason I raised my hand was because about item number 6B, establish duties for each subcommittee. I mean, I think we're clear, right? The subcommittee's duties are to go figure out what their priority is. And then I guess where I'm not clear is, like, at which points are the subcommittees supposed to come back to the full council and get sort of the green light, right? Like, so if the legislative committee meets, subcommittee meets, and we prioritize, 3 items to go after legislation in, do we need to come back to the PRAC and say, hey, we really want to prioritize these 3, or we're all in on fees and we're not touching anything else this year? I mean, do we need the green light from the PRAC to continue that work? And when are we supposed to report back? It'd be great to have a little more clarity about that, if you don't mind.
Who wants to address Emily's question? Todd.
Well, I don't know if I have really a fulsome answer, rather than we're going to have at least quarterly meetings by custom, even though we're not obligated to do so. That's kind of where we landed, it seems. So how about at least an update or report at each meeting? But I don't know if I really don't know if we want to then sort of provide feedback to that subcommittee and say, well, yeah, do this, don't do that, or do we merely wait for essentially final recommendations from each subcommittee, trust them to do the work, and don't use full committee time? So I like reporting at each large meeting, but I don't know if we should be directing more than that, at least until they get to a final product.
I would agree with that sentiment, Todd. Thank you.
I mean, also, it'll be on the agenda, right? So with some advance of like what was talked about in subcommittees, so people, like, if it seems like it's a juncture where the PrAC as a whole wants to say, no, you know, we've got some concerns, then I guess it could happen as necessary. Does that work for everybody?
Steve.
Since we were talking about the work for each committee and what their agendas will be, I just thought I'd share something, the thing I mentioned earlier, just the summary of kind of topic areas. If it's helpful,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to share it here in the chat.
Actually, I don't know. I might be able to pull it up.
Oh, Steve, I think I can share your document. I'll go find it. Hold on.
Sorry, I muted that whole time. This is a subjective categorization, but there were several suggestions, for example, around surveying, like doing more surveys on public records policies, and that would be what I'm calling data gathering. There was one suggestion to revisit the 2017 deadline bill, and there are a bunch of questions about exemptions and how to address those, and fees. Those are the two big things in terms of number of people who spoke up on them under legislative. Although they also did come up a little bit under non-legislative. Public Records Act as an institution, that would be things like the person who suggested a 10-year strategic plan. Request public body awareness is things like identifying model policies and practices, best practices, trainings, and things like that. Requester awareness is also training for the public. There's some retention issues, and then there are various issues under transparency by design, like proactively trying to anticipate needs for disclosure and more efficient ways to do that. So it seems that some of these, it seems like maybe the chairs or the two committees can sort of decide between the two of them, like which of these is going to go into which bucket.
Yeah, I want to be sure that we really empower the subcommittees to take on as much as they want. And despite the fact that the full PrAC can, I suppose, provide a little bit of direction, I would expect and hope that we will all trust the subcommittees to do the work that has been outlined on this very comprehensive and colorful graph that Steve has put together. So my hope is that we can use this by the subcommittees to do the work that we anticipate, and allow those subcommittees to prioritize amongst themselves which issues ought to be raised. If you don't think that issues are being raised in a subcommittee that ought to be raised, then you ought to be on that subcommittee, right? So if you have an interest in moving a certain item that's on this this list here, and it falls into a subcommittee that you don't happen to be a member of, well, you might want to rethink, at least in my opinion, which subcommittees you're participating on. Emily, is your hand still up? Okay. So it appears as though we have our chairs and vice chairs for the subcommittees. Todd, do we have anything under item B that we need to, on item number 6, excuse me, sub B, do we have anything else we need to discuss? I'm not just for Todd, I suppose it's for the rest of the council. Is there anything else? Because we can certainly go to the next item agenda, which I would note happens to be the last agenda item for today's work.
Thanks, Mark. I would just say let's make sure that Emily, Scott, and myself as chairs of these subcommittees commit to calling at least one meeting before our December meeting, which I suspect we will all do, subject to everybody's schedules. Obviously, it's great to get started, but just putting that out there.
And I would also note, Todd, I believe that the legislative committee during our last meeting targeted a 2023 attempt to get something on fees. That would be the legislative committee's goal, at least as it was stated during our last meeting.
I think that's a great goal. I certainly have my own opinions about what needs to go into any sort of stakeholder work to make this happen, and if that means whether or not we could get to 2023, but I'm sure that'll be ripe for ample discussion in our subcommittee meeting.
Well, we may be forced to have that discussion whether or not the PRAC comes up with a bill, because there is an ex officio member on this committee who has a very distinct interest on this topic. So I don't want to be seen as kicking that can down the road any longer, shall we just say, okay? With that, I will close up item number 6 on today's agenda and open up a discussion for setting prospective agendas for our next meeting. Todd, will you remind the council when our next regular meeting is scheduled? I believe we have another meeting set up. Is that correct, or am I incorrect on that?
You are correct, and I'm going to confirm the dates. I don't say the wrong one and then have to change what I'm saying. We are set for 2 p.m. on Thursday, December 9th. That was the best date available after the doodle poll.
So you kind of were cutting in and out on me, so I didn't understand a word you just said, but I'll nod.
Sorry about that. Thursday, December 9th, 2 to 4 p.m.
Okay, so that is our next prospective meeting in December. Obviously, it would be the chair's hope that the subcommittees will have hopefully met at least by then. So I'm hoping that we can have an agenda item of a quick report from each of the subcommittees. I'll shut my pie hole at this point and see if any other members of the council have suggestions at this point. Thank you. All right, nobody's stepping up. Perhaps, Todd, another agenda item, and you and Emily discussed this just for the council's understanding and knowledge. Todd, myself, and Emily did have a conversation about 2 weeks ago about agenda setting and how we will be coordinating amongst ourselves as the advocate, the vice chair, and the chair of the PRAC. There were a couple of things that I requested be included in our regular agendas of the PRAC. One of those items was a report from Todd on his outreach efforts. Another was on providing us a report on his mediation efforts. So those are two of the advocates, if I may say so, primary responsibilities. So we will get regular updates from Todd on that. I also requested that for each meeting, the public be given an opportunity to address the PRAC, so that if people choose to want to participate, that they be given that opportunity. With that having been said, are there other items that folks would like to have on our future agenda? One other note before I get to that, though. I have requested that we get a briefing from the Sunshine Committee, Michael Crone, that will be probably you, of course, as to the work of the Sunshine Committee, because I one of the fears that I have when we're talking about the exemptions is that we get crosswise with the Sunshine Committee. I think it's important for the council to understand what the Sunshine Committee is doing, where they are in their work, so that we can hopefully avoid getting crosswise with the work that they are doing. And I don't want us to be duplicating perhaps the work that they're doing. Les, I see your hand. Thank you for bailing me out.
Someone's got to quiet you down, Mark. No, I just want to follow up on your point about making sure that the public had an opportunity to address the council. And I think we ought to do everything possible to invite that public participation. And I don't know how we can do it. And Todd, this will be kind of in your wheelhouse. But when we move out agendas and post material, to invite people that they can submit written comments to us as well. They don't have to attend in a meeting to influence what we're doing.
Thanks, Les. I
Great
could
point.
include that in my listserv or distribution list, I guess is the more modern term, and Twitter notice for each meeting. And Mark, just a point of order, if I may, based on our discussion, I was going to report on mediations and trainings rather than outreach.
That's right. That's what I meant. Thank you, Todd, for correcting me.
I just want to get in trouble for not doing that.
Yeah,
and
Les,
Mark?
I don't want to cut you off. Yeah, Michael, just hold on for a second. Les, I just want to make sure that you finished up your point there, because your hand is still raised and I don't want to interrupt you, which I've already done.
No, you did it effectively, and I'm going quiet.
Okay. Michael, I know that Scott's hand is raised, and you may not have the hand raising function because you're calling in, so go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry about that. I did when I was online, but it was very choppy and eventually just disconnected me. So yes, I do not have the advantage of that. But I just wanted to say, Mark, that I would be very happy starting in December to have like a standing agenda item be a brief report from me on the Sunshine Committee's work. And I also think that another good standing agenda item, frankly, would be this one, which is at the end of our meeting, inviting members to sort of propose agenda items. Other than that, I think that, the things you've identified from Todd, the public participation, and then our subcommittee work and reports, to me, that feels like a pretty full agenda for a meeting of the committee.
Thank you, Michael. Scott?
I was just going to add that I think at a public meeting provision within the bylaws is something that was envisioned. It's something that we can certainly incorporate into our official policy.
Yeah, great. I hope that that's what we would do, if not for ourselves, but for potentially future members of the PRAC, that at least this initial council always felt as though the public should have 100% access to the workings of either the full council or any subcommittees it creates. Tony.
You're muted, Tony.
Sorry, Tony. Tony, you're on mute.
Thanks. So I don't want to get too cheesy, but I wonder if there's a way to like maybe put on the agenda item like something to celebrate the public records, and I can give an example, or just to highlight something good for public records. I came across today. I was researching something, and I came across the Arkansas Press Association has a really, really great tool for the public that I used to carry around in my back pocket. And I was wondering if I can share links on meetings. Is that allowed? So I'll just share this link if you guys are interested in looking at it. And the people that wrote it, this tool has been around since the 60s, and it's got even a script. So public meetings in Arkansas don't have the privilege where reporters can come into executive sessions. So sometimes when there's executive sessions, reporters can. This book has essentially a script that reporters can I guess essentially speak out loud to put on the record. Anyways, it's a cool tool, and if folks are interested in just kind of seeing how other states handle this, I'm going to drop it in the chat right now. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. Steve.
So along those lines of good news and celebration, and I'm sorry that Representative Power had to run, but I don't believe, Todd, that since we've been meeting post-session, that we've ever taken a time to commemorate the passage of the independence legislation, and I think we ought to do so at least once. I'm really glad that that the bill passed, and I'm grateful for all the people who made it happen, and I'm grateful to you, Todd, for bearing with this process and making sure that it got done. So, cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for bringing that up.
Here, here. And thanks, Steve. And thanks to all of you for all your work.
Well, perhaps to pile on, Steve, this morning I spent an hour with Emily. You'll have to remind me who George is with. The Washington Open Government
Coalition.
Thank you. I spent an hour today on the phone with a gentleman from Washington from the aforementioned group talking to me about the genesis of the PRAC, which was a bit of a challenge because I had to go all the way back to 2015, and I won't remind anybody of sort of what spawned all the public records bills that were enacted in 2017. But it was a fascinating conversation, and just so you folks know, it appeared to me, at least from that conversation, that there are people in the state of Washington looking to possibly replicate what was done and what we are all involved with here in Oregon. And that's a similar type of public records advocate who is independent. And so people are watching what we're doing, folks. And I thought I would just share that with you all. And it was an interesting conversation. With that, I think we've pretty much completed our agenda for today. But before we conclude, is there anything else that might be relevant and or good for the order? All right, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Unless anybody has anything else. Going once, going twice.
So moved.
Thank you, Tony. Scott. Today's meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Go Ducks and Beavers.
Take care.
Bye.